Today we are doing a My Week in Books, and I actually have physical books. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Adrian, and today we are doing a My Week in Books. We are going to be looking at what I've been reading this week, how I've been enjoying it, and hopefully whether or not you will enjoy it too if you decide to pick it up. There are 4 books I'm going to be talking about today, including some Brandon Sanderson, some Ted Chiang, and some James Islington as well. So let's jump straight into it. So the book that I've been reading for the longest out of these guys is Boosh, An Echo of Things to Come by James Islington. I have technically been reading this for a few weeks, but to be honest, I was very slow picking it up properly. For the first couple of weeks, I only actually read maybe 4 or 5 chapters. I am now in at the start of chapter 22, so just under halfway through the book. And I'm actually really enjoying it. It did take me a little while to get into, but that wasn't necessarily the book's fault. That was some general life stuff getting in the way as well. I will say it is also slowed down a little bit due to one of the characters that we are following. The pacing in this book is not quite as fast. It doesn't pull you through quite as quickly as A Shadow of What Was Lost did, and that's particularly because when we're following Caden, he is having huge amounts of flashback chapters. Every single one of his chapters is essentially a flashback chapter with a little bit of present mixed in. And that does mean that instead of having these flashbacks that inform the present and springboard us forward, they are very much backwards looking, and that does create a little bit of an issue in terms of pacing here. The other 3 characters, however, I think are paced relatively well, and I am really enjoying the plot arcs we are getting for actually all 4 of them, including Caden. It's just a pity about that pacing. All in all, definitely enjoying it. I might even finish this by the next time I speak to you on My Week in Books. We'll have to see how I go. Probably not enjoying it quite as much as I did book 1, but definitely still an enjoyable read, and definitely going to be continuing on to book 3 if it continues as it is. So as well as that, I have been on audiobook listening to Furies of Calderon. This is book 1 of the Codex Alera series by Jim Butcher. This is epic fantasy from Jim Butcher, and I am actually really enjoying it. I have in the past tried to listen to this a couple of times previously, and it's never quite done it for me. I've only maybe got 7 or 8 chapters in those times, and it just didn't really appeal. This time I am much preferring it. I am enjoying this far more than I was the first couple of times I tried to read this a few years ago, and I think part of it is that I've realised that this has got many more POVs than I thought it did, and they are much more interesting than I thought they were. So when I was listening to this before, I very much had in my head that we were following Tavi, who's sort of our younger character almost exclusively, with some other characters mixed in. Actually getting a little bit further into the book, I'm about halfway through, we are following actually 4 characters, relatively equally actually, and that is making it much more enjoyable because they are, for me, much more interesting characters at this point. I do know that generally people love the following books much more than they love this first one, and actually if that is the case, if it does improve, this is going to be a great series for me because I'm actually enjoying this first book far more than I was the other times I tried to read it. Hopefully by next week I'll have got through the entirety of this and I'll be able to give you a full review and a quick rundown of how I enjoyed it, but definitely a book that is a good setup for the series to come, and I can imagine me enjoying this series immensely more than I have done in the past when I've tried to get into it. The other book that I have been reading this week, and actually I actually read it in one sitting. It is a novella, and that is by Brandon Sanderson. It's called Snapshot. So Snapshot is a sci-fi story following a pair of deadbeat detectives essentially who are sent into a computer recreation of a day in the life of their city to help the real life cops solve crimes. They're there to follow suspects on the day things happened, to find where murder weapons have been placed, that kind of thing. And they are essentially informants for the real police who are doing their job, trying to prosecute criminals for what has gone on. This is about an 80-page or so novella. I read it in about an hour and a half, 2 hours, and it was a lot of fun. Considering the setup, there are certainly twists that you would expect, and we do get some of those, but also Brandon manages to deliver us twists that I did not expect. and they were nicely done, nicely delivered, a very well executed novella. It is not going to necessarily blow your mind, but very, very enjoyable. I gave it a 4.5-star rating, which is very high for a novella. I have historically rated novellas relatively low on my star scale, so that tells you something about how I feel about this book in particular. I think it is done well. It is not super groundbreaking, but I did love the execution of it, and particularly some of the character work. For such a short amount of page time, I think we did some really, really good character work for our two main characters. So all in all, definitely enjoyable. If you've got an hour or two to spend reading a novella, I would highly recommend Snapshot as a fun little sci-fi story. So getting on to the fourth book I've been reading this week, and that is Exhalation by Ted Chiang. This is a short story collection full of sci-fi inspired short stories. I have read 2 of them so far this week. So the first one of them is The Merchant and the Alchemist's Gate, and I really enjoyed that as a short story. This is the first story in the book, and for me it was highly enjoyable. It did a good job at addressing the themes that it was going for, that we can't change the past, and even questioning how much we can change the future, but actually that we can change our perspective on the past and the future and the present. And I really liked that concept, and I think it was executed rather well. So all in all, big fan of that first story in Exhalation. The second story in this collection is actually the titular story, Exhalation, and for me this didn't quite hit the mark as well. This is partially because it didn't feel much like a story. There wasn't a huge arc to it, there wasn't much narrative flow to it. It felt like a very good, well-crafted piece of writing that didn't have much of an arc, and for me that just lessened the impact of it slightly. It felt a little bit clinical. However, I did enjoy it. It was definitely worth reading. It was only 15 pages or so, but very enjoyable, just not much of an arc to it. It was very much more exploring a world and a person, a character, and seeing how those things interrelate. The impression I'm getting from these stories is that the sci-fi concept is going to be very interesting every time. The character work may be better or worse. Now that's a very quick opinion off 2 pieces, so maybe Ted Chiang is going to prove me horrifically wrong here and his character work is going to be amazing going forward, but that's the impression I'm getting so far. I will obviously keep you in the loop with how I get on with the rest of this short story collection as I go. So there you go, that's my reading week. 3 books that I'm still plodding my way through, 1 that I have finished, that novella that I really, really enjoyed. So if you did enjoy this video, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe if you want to see more of my content and see how I'm going to like the rest of this. And hopefully I'll see you guys again soon.